Hi, Nelson Ford at the Gunsmith, Phoenix, Arizona. Going to do a little Q&A today. I read one comment where a fellow was upset about MIM parts, and we all were. I mean, in '96, I called the factory several times and asked for engineers and yelled at them and told them they were responsible for destroying the finest gun in the world, and they would go down in history as the people that destroyed the Smith and Wesson revolver. They, in fact, were the people that will go down in history as saving the Smith and Wesson revolver. The hammer forged parts were very expensive to make, machined to tolerances, and then cyanide hardened. It cost more to make a hammer and a trigger for a Smith and Wesson revolver back then than they made the entire Taurus revolver that was competing with it from Brazil. They could not continue making the gun like that. They would have had to discontinue it. And we needed to save the Smith revolver. It's the finest design. The way the cylinder comes apart and goes back together, the way the action works, the way it times itself, the way you could headspace them. They're the premier revolver. And the guys that went through those engineering changes, I'm sure it was hard for them. You know, when you pull out a hammer or a trigger, all the parts can fall out of them. The hammer strut, the trigger strut, you know, nothing is pinned in there anymore. I remember one of the engineers telling me it cost him 75 cents per hole, 6 holes, $6 almost. They had to do something. We wanted to keep that gun operating. In '96, some good things happened. The cam stop for the cylinder keeps it from coming off the back of the gun. It's on the side of the frame. And they used to be staked in place in there. They used to be pressed in place. And they could turn, and they had a shelf in there. And the cylinder set against the shelf, and then they cut part of it away. The cylinder would roll back in and out, and that had to be fit to the gun. A lot of work to get those in there. And now they cast part of the frame as the stop. I had people come in with them turning, and we had to try to turn them and restake them and refit them. That's a good thing. Other good things happened. The pins would fall out of the back of the cylinder that orientate the star, and then the British actually put a cut in there, making a square cut that held the star in place. Whether I like the way it looked, I'm a traditionalist. I don't have the new guns, I have the old ones, but they did things that made the guns better and able to function. And so, change is tough. Radial tires over bias ply, I was there. They were wonderful. So some change is necessary, and those guns are still made today, so we should thank God that we still have the Smith and Wesson revolver, and the MIM parts also, the case hardened parts, when they hardened them, would often lose a little bit of their arc. They'd warp a little, and fitting them in the guns sometimes was testy, and some parts had to be tossed. MIM parts, when those things come out of the mold injection machine, they're perfect every time. There's no fitting on the line. There's fitting on the line, but they basically saved a lot of man hours putting the guns together. So I'll leave that one alone. But that's my take on them. And I was open 16 years when those guns came out, 1996, the new MIM part guns. Here's a guy that says, I've never understood, 1911 question, the damage potential in dropping the slide in an empty chamber. The Springfields have a sleeved barrel. They sleeve on the lugs. And I've seen many of them where the lugs are torn away, and that's when people drop the slide, and it comes down with its full force. And then folks always ask me, well, what's the difference if you're loading a round or not? Gun works every time. And this is kind of cool. I wanted to bring my daughter into the game because we were all shooting, my son and I, and I wanted to bring her into the game in 1911s. And so she's 12 or 13 years old. I had to figure out how to do this, and I was going to load 155s with 3.7 or 3.6 of bullseye, and of course it wouldn't work the standard government model, not even close. And so I started dropping spring weights down. They came in variants of 2 pounds, 14, 12, 10, and 8. And when I realized it didn't work, the first thing I did is I put an 8-pounder in there because I had them in my case. We used them for comp guns back in the day, early 80s, LEK kits, the Lethem Anus kit from Wilson, and Chuck Rogers made me comps. A lot of dropping spring weights down. And so the first thing it is, I dropped a 8-pound spring in there because that was an available spring weight. And I put I always like to use the 7-round magazines, not the 8s. They'll always fit in the gun. Rounds can collapse. They have the stronger spring in them. And so I dropped the 7-round magazine in there and I hit the slide release, and the slide came forward and it stopped on the back of the round. And I thought, wow, let me bump this up. And I went to 10 pounds and took the round right in. So I tried a different 8-rounder from a different package, same thing, stopped right on the back. And so I learned that it took 8 pounds of force to load a round into the chamber. And so when people ask why is it different when I'm dropping the slide empty or loading a round, it cost 8 pounds of that 16-pound standard government spring to load a round. So when you're loading a round, it morphs that 16-pound spring down to 8 pounds instead of giving the full force of 16. I do see the lugs torn off, like I said, on the sleeved, mostly only on the sleeved Springfield barrels. They sleeve their lugs on. The Colt barrel is all one piece hammer forged steel, and the lugs are part of the barrel. It's all machined together. And so that's one plus on the Colts right there. But also, how does it affect the trigger pull? Why is it bad for trigger pulls? When your trigger is at rest, trigger is forward, slide is down, the disconnect is able to go up in the slot, in the slide, and it goes up behind the sear legs, and it's in place against the sear. And so when you're dropping the slide, especially, this is, I tell people 100 times, if that's a 7-pound, 6-pound, 7-pound trigger pull, doesn't matter. You get down to 3.5 pounds, you better have things right in there. And when people take those triggers, you can bend the ears to get rid of all the pre-travel. I think that's a little dangerous. A little pre-travel is good. When they have those in the disconnect, they have it set up so the disconnect can just barely get forward to that sear, slip into place. So now you're dropping the slide with the weight of the trigger. And remember, when that slide comes down and hits, that frame's going to want to move forward. And any weight the trigger has, it's going to want to stay there. So it's going to try to influence the disconnect, which is against the sear. And now you got a set of hammer hooks on some expensive hammer that are down at 20 thousandths or less, all polished up. It's when that slide comes down, that trigger, all that mechanism is going to try to give a little push against that trigger pull. And maybe it's only loading it, with 1 pound or less. But you're playing with fire here. Give your gun some pre-travel and post-travel. That's another thing I should just touch on right now while we're here. Today or yesterday, I had a guy come in, put a whole bunch in there yesterday. He had put a whole bunch of 1911s on the counter. And I kind of went through them. He wanted to leave one or the other, and he's been toying with them. He wanted to know what was going on. And one of them, I grabbed the hammer. I always grab the hammer and pull the trigger and just work the hammer back and forth, because people cinch those trigger stops up so the sear will come off the full cock notch and the hammer will come down. But they're not thinking about the half cock notch. And the half cock notch will hit the sear and you'll feel that. So you hold the trigger to the rear and you work the hammer and you can feel that little bumping in there where your half cock notch would be. And the half cock notch is hitting that sear every time it comes down and wants to take a little bit of metal off it or polish it or do something to it. And you're putting 1,000 rounds through this thing and it's doing it every time. Back off that trigger stop a little bit and set your trigger stop up to clear the half cock notch, not the full cock notch. You can do all kinds of dolly tricks with the half cock notches, and you can narrow it to the center like the gold cups and have the slot and the sear. There's 1,000 things you can do. Can't cover them all right now, but those are some things that you might want to take interest in when you talk about dropping slides. I wouldn't do it. Is a 1972 Model 19-2 safe for .357 Magnum ammo? They're all safe. It all depends on how much damage you want to do to your cone. You are going to do damage to your cone, and sooner or later it's going to split. It's not made for it. It's made for 12,000 pounds per square inch, unless you get the very new stuff where they narrowed the extractor rod and went to a simple, what would be the thickness of the center pin. That's the ejector rod, and the two-piece ejector rod is now gone. It's down to the thin one on those Magnum Ks, so they could drop the plateau down on the yoke when it comes in, and they don't have to cut the barrel away to fit it. So now you have a full forcing cone. Then again, you're dealing with brand new guns. Trigger stops. This is a good one. I really enjoy your videos, including learning more about the Ks. Can you explain what the trigger stop, why some people remove it, others don't? The trigger stop is a little triangular piece that was in the guns back probably in the 60s and 70s. And they were slick. You loosen the screw, you cock the hammer back, you push the trigger stop up against the trigger, you tighten the screw, dab it with some red Loctite, hope it doesn't move again. But remember, your trigger's hitting it every time you shoot your gun, and the shock of the gun, and cleaning fluids, etc. If they turn in there, the screw gets loose, and they turn in there, they can keep your trigger from coming all the way back, and your gun's now jammed. It doesn't work. And so I would remove them from the gun, except for boxed collectibles that should have them on it. Take them out. They're trouble. I have a whole drawer full of them. Quick general rundown on 1911 brands, pros and cons. There's a lot of information that could be covered there. It would take an hour. I hate to say the Turkish Clones are good. They're one of the few people that actually copy the Colt Sear spring verbatim and the Colt Sear. Who's ever doing that over there is sharp, and I wish American manufacturers would follow suit. Because the Turks are doing a lot of good stuff, and it's hard for me to say that. They're making good guns. I'm a Colt guy. I ride a Harley. I like old Mopars, but the Turks are making a good gun. They make a good high power too. Got a lot of questions here. Don't want to run this video too long. I'm going to go ahead and cover some questions later. We got a lot of them here to cover. I don't want to sound too long-winded, so we're going to go ahead and close this up, and we'll hit some more questions. Keep asking the questions. My son prints them out and gives them to me. I'll try to answer them as best I can. Thanks.